Imagine that you are going on a long trip with your car. One of the things you're likely to do will be to fill it up so you can cover as much distance as possible. Our muscles also need fuel to work, and they draw it mainly from two sources: fatty acids and glucose. These fuel reserves are stored in the form of adipose tissue and glycogen. When you consume carbohydrates, your body uses a portion of them for immediate energy needs, while the rest is stored in the tank as glycogen or converted into fatty acids through a process called de novo lipogenesis. The main glycogen stores are found in your muscles and liver. Unfortunately, the glycogen fuel reserves are much less than those stored in adipose tissue. This poses a risk of depletion during prolonged and intense physical exertion, leading to a decline in performance or even complete exhaustion. Let's go back to the 1930s. Two Danish scientists decided to investigate how two extreme dietary strategies would affect performance during intense cycling. They found that performance capacity could vary significantly depending on the diet. By comparing a high-carbohydrate diet to a high-fat diet, they observed that the high-carbohydrate diet almost tripled the time until exhaustion compared to the high-fat diet. In hindsight, this seems obvious to us now, as we know from exercise physiology that carbohydrates play a greater role in energy expenditure during intense activities. Nearly 30 years later, Swedish scientists conducted a 7-day protocol. It involved depleting muscle glycogen stores through exercise and a low-carbohydrate diet, followed by a 3-day loading phase. As you can imagine, the 3-day loading period after prior depletion led to glycogen supercompensation and significantly prolonged the time to exhaustion in the test. Several years later, the impact of 3 different protocols on muscle glycogen levels was examined to determine whether a period of low carbohydrate intake is necessary for subsequent supercompensation after loading. It turned out that both Group A and Group B experienced a significant increase in muscle glycogen stores compared to Group C. Interestingly, the last group achieved the best average time, although it was not statistically significant. At the beginning of this century, the effect of a 3-day high-carbohydrate diet on glycogen levels, without any training, but with the last training session performed on the day before the loading phase, was investigated. They consumed carbohydrates at a rate of 10 grams per kilogram of body weight per day. After just 1 day of loading, muscle glycogen content significantly increased, and interestingly, after another 2 days of the diet, it remained practically at the same level, with only statistically insignificant marginal differences. The common denominator in the aforementioned studies is that through a significant increase in carbohydrate intake and a decrease in training volume or even rest, we can achieve muscle glycogen supercompensation. In other words, a substantial increase in its quantity compared to the initial values. The second interesting finding from Sherman's paper is that although both loading protocols resulted in glycogen supercompensation, it did not improve the performance in the 20.9 kilometers run compared to the group that had a regular mixed diet. Considering this aspect, carbohydrate loading is probably not necessary when the exercise duration is not long enough to significantly deplete glycogen stores. We also know that the protocol involving a flushing phase before the loading period is not essential, and in reality, 36 to 48 hours of high carbohydrate intake combined with rest or light training is sufficient to achieve glycogen supercompensation. Additionally, this approach is more practical for athletes, as implementing a 7-day protocol would certainly be tiring and problematic. According to Hawley's 1997 review, nutritional strategies aimed at achieving glycogen supercompensation can provide significant benefits in activities lasting longer than 90 minutes, extending endurance by approximately 20% and slightly improving performance by 2 to 3%. For example, an athlete is able to run or cycle for 2 to 3% longer while maintaining the same pace. These results are mainly based on studies conducted on runners and cyclists. The review suggests that in activities lasting 60 to 90 minutes, there are practically no benefits to loading. However, some team sports, such as soccer, are less predictable than steady-state running or cycling, and during a match, there are often dynamic sprints or jumps. Unfortunately, it is difficult to conduct studies that would verify the validity of loading in team sports for obvious reasons. We have some individual studies simulating a soccer match, but we cannot draw definitive conclusions based on them. The validity of loading will also depend on the player's position. In high-intensity activities lasting less than 5 minutes, carb loading is also unlikely to provide significant benefits. In this case, it is sufficient to ensure an adequate carbohydrate intake to normalize glycogen stores and promote recovery. Performance decrements have only been observed in studies using extremely low carbohydrate diets less than 1 gram per kilogram of body weight, which are not commonly used in athletes' nutrition. Remember that carbohydrate loading may not be effective in every discipline. Analyze carefully whether the duration and intensity of your activity are suitable for implementing loading. Even if you do not benefit from loading in your discipline, still make sure to maintain an adequate carbohydrate intake in your diet to keep glycogen stores at optimal levels. If you decide to try carb loading, the most reasonable option appears to be increasing carbohydrate intake to 8 to 12 grams per kilogram of body weight per day for 2 days before the planned event, while reducing the intensity of training. To consume such a quantity of carbohydrates, focus primarily on more processed products such as white pasta, bread, and rice. You can also include low-fat sweets like gummy candies, jellies, and sorbets. Additionally, incorporate fruit juices, jams, and dried fruits. Consuming this amount of carbohydrates may be challenging for most individuals. It may also cause feelings of heaviness or gastrointestinal issues. If you have never used carbohydrate loading before, it is recommended to test this strategy prior to important events, preferably under the guidance of a sports dietitian. Considering that 1 gram off glycogen binds 3 to 5 grams off water, you can expect a body weight increase of 2 to 3% after the loading period. In weight category sports, this may be unfavorable. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more informative content on supplements, sports, and fitness.